So now it's time to start the plenary session 3. In this session, this session title is The Rise of the Global South and the Transformation of the World Order. Allow me to introduce the panelists and the moderator. Professor Meghan O'Sullivan, Director of Belfer Center of Science and International Affairs, Harvard University. Professor Suzuki Kazuto, Director of the Institute of Geoeconomics at the International House of Japan. Professor HOSOYA Yuichi, Director of Research of the Institute of Geoeconomics at the International House of Japan. And the moderator of this session is Ms. MIKAMI Chisa, Head of Hiroshima Office, United Nations Institute for Training and Research, or UNITAR. In this session, Ms. MIKAMI is going to serve as the moderator for the session. Well, thank you for the kind introduction. I am MIKAMI Chisa from United Nations Institute of Training and Research, Hiroshima Office. In November 2023, I became the head of Hiroshima Office, and this is my first time actually attending this forum. Thank you very much for joining me today. So this session, the title is Rise of the Global South and the Transformation of the World Order. And at the beginning of this forum today, we had a Hiroshima Declaration adopted. So in that, they also have some reference on Global South. So I would like to go over that very quickly. So recently, in a Global South, such as Asia, Africa, and Latin America, is becoming more assertive in economy as well as politics, and they have more higher presence. And they are trying to become independent. They're seeking for autonomy and self-determination from developed nations. The framework of international politics gradually evolving alongside the economic growth influenced by the historical consciousness. As Global South countries become more actively involved in addressing challenges like climate change, trade, and security, there is a growing need for a cooperative framework to preserve the international order. So based on this declaration and the part that I quoted, and we have invited the panelists, Professor Suzuki, Professor HOSOYA, and Professor O'Sullivan. And they will give us some thoughts and then share their thoughts. And first, I'm going to ask Professor Suzuki to talk about the economic security and its challenges in important goods such as semiconductors and energy. And Professor HOSOYA is going to talk about the changes in Europe triggered by the Ukraine war. And Professor O'Sullivan is going to talk about the transformation of global order as there is a rise of Global South. And overall, we are going to have a discussion about the building the new international order and the role of corporations. So without further ado, I would like to invite the first panelist, Professor Suzuki, to have a brief introduction of himself, and also want to talk about the important goods such as semiconductor and energy, and touch on the economic security as well. 5 minutes, please. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the introduction. I am Suzuki from the Geoeconomics Institute, and my specialty is in the geoeconomics as well as economic security. So these basically, it's a role of economy in the international society today, and that's the basic research theme. And this time, semiconductor and energy, this is the main topic, but I would like to also talk about what the Global South is playing its role. But one of the things, as we see the rise of Global South, As a background, there is a fact that all the countries are connected globally. Let's take a supply chain. There is no single good manufactured by a single country. You need to procure the material, parts, assemble them, and you need to sell them. So the whole supply chain or value chain really connects all the countries, regardless of global north or south. So that's the world we live in today, and the countries in global south, their role is becoming larger and larger, especially if you focus on minerals or critical minerals, such as lithium or nickel or cobalt. And they are important element for batteries or region or if you think about the decarbonization in the future, these are essential for the future, and Global South is a supplier of this. Similarly, semiconductor, gallium, or silicon are essential materials, and Global South is an indispensable supplier of them as well. So as supply chain connect the whole world, and that's the backbone of the economy today. So in that sense, in order to have a stable business, we need to have a stable order in Global South as well as in international relations. So that means if the world is in a peaceful state, it is essential to have a stable supply. So based on the ESGP, which emphasized the importance of peace under Hiroshima Declaration, I think the P or the peace is really critical for a stability in world order as well. However, we also have to look at the fact that sometimes we have geoeconomic issues, such as the tariff posed by the Trump administration, because many countries trying to put their country first in trade policy. And in order to stabilize your own economy, in the past, when during the time of the imperialism, important minerals or resources, there was a concern and problem of some countries monopolizing these important resources. In particular, China has a very strong influence in critical minerals, and China is also playing a major role among global south countries. And to counter that, the issue of global south is now has become a hot topic. But from global south perspective, they don't want to provide their precious resource to a single country like China only or US only, but they want to treat them as one of the important trade partners. So I think the global south is trying to find a good balance in this relationship. And I think some of the items that we have to look at is semiconductors and energy, because semiconductor doesn't only require minerals, but you need the technological superiority, meaning that you need a high level of technology and skills to produce semiconductors. And these type of technologies are being competed between China and the US. So there is an issue of technological hegemony. During the Biden administration in the US, there was some technology that US has the superiority, and they started to regulate some of the technology export to the China. And as a result, China recently, for example, launched DeepSeek. And in the past, the Biden administration was trying to prevent China making AI, and they wanted to stop exporting advanced semiconductors. Then they will have commercial economic issues, and they won't be able to use it for the military use. So from both military and commercial perspective, the Biden administration wanted to make it more advantageous for the US, and that's why they enforced the export control. But as a result, China became independent, developing their own technology in semiconductor and AI. So in that sense, regulating technology or technology export has some limitation, or at least this case presents that as an actual example. So in that sense, when you think about the relationship with other countries, if you try to block your own economy and protect your own technology or market, this approach eventually provide superiority to the other country or promote autonomy of other countries, or it can be an incentive as well. So this is not very effective approach, but rather we need to support the free trade so that we can maintain the interdependence of each other. And I think this is a better way to maintain the superiority. And if you really have the technological superiority, then others will depend on you or your country, meaning that you can make yourself or your country an essential partner to other countries. And I think that's the way to create a situation where other countries have to depend on your country. And that can be the leverage. And that's the situation that I see. Therefore, it is one thing to maintain the free trade, but at the same time, we need to develop and nurture our industry. And that's very important from the economic security point of view. And regardless of global south or north, each country need to become essential to others in the field that they are very strong at. And I think that's a very important approach in economic security.
There is another topic, which is energy. Well, before, during the time of imperialism, that was to bring about aggression. There's a huge factor of aggression. Those countries which are lacking in energy, including Japan, those countries with energy trying to dominate the countries without energy in order to secure their supply if energy of the aggression occurred, but that was that ended up in the destruction of peace. So through free trade, if you make payment, if you can get an energy, if you can have that kind of system put in place, then you will be able to have the stability, and that is what international order has made it possible to have that system. Currently, when you look at the war, Russia invaded Ukraine, and in the Middle East, Russia is abundant with energy, and Russia invading Ukraine, it is not to seek energy in Ukraine. In Israel and Gaza, it's not Israel seeking for energy in Gaza. Actually, the war can happen in other places than energy. But those countries with energy and technologies, if they are involved in war, for example, the supply of Russia will be stopped, or the technological alliance with Israel, for example, is to be stopped. So with those ambitions of those countries, if they are to engage in wars, it's detrimental to current business. We really have to curb that. We have to deter that so that those wars of aggression or the conflicts will not happen. So I think that would be really the topic that we have to consider, and also the economic negotiation or the sanction against Russia. The Japanese business will incur problems when that happens, not just Japan, but also Europe. If, in order to implement economic sanction against Russia, for example, the European countries dependent upon the energy, the supply of energy, have to be stopped. And European countries, including Germany, and those people in the industry, would have a huge problem. So we have to stop those wars anyhow, because we realize the risks, geopolitical risks, and also we have the big incentive to create peace. Well, that's all from me at this point. I'm going to stop here and ask others to make their points. Mr. Suzuki, thank you very much. Well, we got 4 minutes left on this topic, so maybe let me change the format a little bit. So I'm going to ask HOSOYA-san to speak on Russian and Ukraine and European changes in European situation. That's the next presentation. And then after that, we're going to ask Dr. Sullivan to discuss on her points. These presentations have certain commonalities. So after all those presentations, we're going to have discussions. Yes, thank you very much. Right. I am HOSOYA, and I am the Director of Research of the Institute of Geoeconomics at International House of Japan. Well, I have been given with this huge topic, the Global South emergence and changes in world order, international order. And I just would like to explain to you where the Ukraine situation lies in that regard. The emergence of Global South and also the development of Ukraine war, they are closely interlinked. Ostensibly, it doesn't look so, but the Global South, those phrases and words, back in 2020, in December, when India became the presiding country of G7, and at the time, Ukraine war, during the time, there is a trend that international community criticized Russia and support of Ukraine. 140 countries condemned the invasion by Russia at the UN Assembly, and then even after that, India maintained close relations with Russia, and cheaper oil they decided to import from Russia, which has been severely criticized by European countries. And India, in spite of the criticisms of European countries, we said that the India said that G7 is a minority in the international arena. Rather, G20 are the mainstay, they said. So in the online in 2023 January, the Global South Voice Summit was held, and altogether 125 countries participated. And when the Cold War ended, G7 countries account for 66% of the total economy, but currently 42 to 43%. So G7 has fallen down to minority. So G7 countries cannot decide upon the justice or rules of the international community. And in the same month, the of 2023, Japan became the country to host the G7, and decide that the international community is going to provide support to Ukraine. And in the changing world, Global South countries, the collaboration with them is what have been decided. And these two dichotomies, those ostensibly looking very facing each other, had to be managed together. And Prime Minister Kishida visited Delhi, India, on the 7th of March. And in India and Japan, both representing either G7 and G20, have made an agreement. And epoch-mapping vision was announced for the free and open Indo-Pacific. And there are three concepts are involved. The inclusiveness is one, and the second is openness. And the third is diversity. Pluralism, rather, excuse me. So these three concepts were held upon so that Global South countries can be invited and to present their opinions. And about 2 years ago, 2023 in March, in this hotel, right here, G7 Hiroshima Summit was held, and President Zelensky participated as well. And Ukraine, supporting Ukraine session was held, and also the session on Global South were held. So these two were united in this venue, and that was really based upon the transformation of the international order. And at the same time, Japanese diplomacy has changed accordingly. HOSOYA-san, thank you very much. Next, the changes of world order with an emergence of Global South. Professor Sullivan, would you please?
Very much. And I'd like to say how much I am honored to be here for this opportunity to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the atomic bomb and also the end of World War II. And in many respects, this 80th anniversary is an opportune moment to think about the global order, the world order, which is what I've been asked to speak about. The reason for this is that the last 80 years, I think, is widely recognized as a period of relatively unprecedented prosperity and peace. And when we look back at those 80 years, of course, this is not agreed to by every element or every country in the world, but I'd say that many countries share that assessment. And much of that assessment has to do with the fact that underpinning the last 80 years was a common set of norms and institutions and a rules-based order that was created in part by the United States, but also with its allies. And it was an order that benefited not only those that created this order, but many others that became part of the global order by buying into the global economy and adhering to these norms and institutions. So at this 80-year mark, we're forced to look at these last 80 years and to at least contemplate that that world order is shifting in some dramatic ways. We see a lot of strain on the norms and institutions that underpin those last 80 years. And we have to contemplate, as I said, what might come next. And I think it's fair to say that it is unclear what the next 80 years, or however long we're going to measure these things in, what the next global order is going to look like. But there are already a variety of things that are very clearly consequential to the idea of a global order. Sometimes people talk about this as a shift to a new global order. I think it's better described as a number of transitions that are ongoing and that are leading us to a very different international place. And in the interest of time, I'll just mention what these shifts are and then put them in the context of this particular topic. The first shift is from a cooperative order of the last 80 years, particularly when it comes to great powers, to a much more competitive global order. The second shift is a global order in which the United States played the role of the stabilizer and being interested in the status quo. And now we see a shift to where the United States is much more a global disruptor and actually is one of the actors that is actively dismantling some of the institutions of that global order. A third shift is a shift from an increasingly integrated global economy over the last many decades to an increasingly fragmented global economy. And then the last shift is from either a unipolar or a bipolar order to a much more multipolar order. So what's the combination of all of these shifts together? They take us to a place where we have a global order that is more competitive, more fragmented, without a stabilizer in the sense of the United States, and ultimately a world order that is more prone to conflict. And that conflict can manifest itself in a number of ways, but particularly in the concept of this particular meeting, it's worth noting, as Takanami said in his opening comments this morning, this is a world in which the potential use of nuclear weapons or the proliferation of nuclear weapons is greater than we have seen over the last 80 years, very much to our concern. So obviously it is important for businesses, governments, and individuals and other institutions to work to stabilize this shifting global order. And there's a variety of ways in which we may go about this work. One of them, of course, is to look at the US-China relationship, which is one of the big uncertainties and one of the destabilizing factors in this new global order. But focused on the topic of this particular session, another area that could prove to be stabilizing is the growing strength of, I won't say the global south, I'll say middle powers. What is the distinction between these two things? The global south more or less encompasses so many countries around the world, more or less every country that's not in the OECD. The middle power concept is one which is more narrow, maybe a subset of the global south, but includes countries from Brazil to Saudi Arabia to Egypt, South Africa, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, countries that by themselves are not global powers, but they're also not countries that are powerless. There are countries that have significant assets, significant ways in which they can influence certain parts of the global order, but need to work with others in order to achieve significant impacts on a global scale. So if we take this concept of middle powers, we can see that we're in an era where middle powers, if they can work collectively together, have an ability to address some of these global problems at a time when the great powers, be it Europe, Russia, China, or the United States, are not doing sufficient work in addressing these great problems together. So let me just give you 3 areas where middle powers could play an important role and already have done in some respect. The first is when it comes to climate. And if you think about the 2015, the Paris Accord, which was the most successful of the Conference of the Parties, you saw a group come together called the High Ambitions countries, emitters, that came together to try to set a higher standard for targets for where the world should go when it comes to carbon emissions. And these were a lot of middle powers coming together and trying to build a mini coalition to force a more ambitious agenda. The middle powers could do this again as well. They're very, very important in terms of where the energy transition is going to go. Most of the growth in carbon emissions over the next 2 decades is going to be taking place in these set of countries. So their ability to come together and set new standards for the price of carbon, for deforestation, for carbon border adjustment mechanisms, all of these things could be areas where these countries, the middle powers, could make a big difference. Another is in trade. That certainly we look at, even if we're thinking about the role of Japan, but we think about the middle powers, if they could come together, as they did for the CPTPP, and create a consensus for more rules-based trade that in some cases will exclude some of the larger powers, that can be a fundamental contribution to sustaining this, this order of a rules-based order. And then finally, I would say technology is a space where these middle powers could have a very significant impact. In the past, in 2020 in Paris, they came together to talk about a global framework for AI. Looking forward and looking ahead, we're in a world where these countries are going to be under increasing pressure to choose between US technologies and Chinese technologies. And they'll be doing this in a vacuum and doing it individually. If they decide they're going to come together and collectively make decisions about what kind of norms should be associated with the use and adoption of technologies, they could have a major impact on the evolution of AI in the global system. So I'll stop by saying that I think there's a real opportunity here for these middle powers to play a stabilizing role, but there's also an opportunity for Japan in this. Japan is not really considered a middle power based on the definition that I gave, but Japan has a lot of credibility with this group, given its leadership in economics, its leadership in development, and in finance. And Japan can play a number of roles in terms of harnessing the power of these middle powers. It can be a bridge between this set of powers and great powers in the United States and China and others. It is also a country that has demonstrated its ability to be a policy innovator. And certainly that is very much required when these middle powers try to overcome some of the downsides they have to playing the role that I'm describing. And then finally, I think Japan could play a very significant role in bringing together coalitions of middle powers and helping them overcome some of their drawbacks, which include, but are not limited to, limited capacity and coordination. So again, just in ending, we're in a very fraught period in geopolitical relationships. I don't need to tell this to business people, they know this very well. But we're in a period where we could see one of the stabilizing forces be middle powers that are building coalitions around particular objectives together, and that I can envision Japan playing a significant role in that process. Thank you.
Professor Sullivan, thank you so much. And now we would like to open up for a discussion based on 3 presentations by the professors. But from now, we would like to switch to English.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Suzuki-san, Hosoya-san, Sullivan-san, for your excellent the speeches and the topics that are put on the table. First of all, I would like to ask each of you if you have any questions or comments to other panelists. Who would like to start? Yes.
Thank you. I'll begin by asking a question of Suzuki-san. You mentioned about the importance of having free trade among countries that are providing vital commodities to supply chains. And I think that that's very much the optimal case. If we think about the energy transition, for example, the fastest, cheapest energy transition the world can make is one in which there are no barriers to trade. But that's also a world that's devoid of geopolitics. And of course, we don't live in that world. So when you look at the desirable, which I think you defined very clearly, and then we look at the reality of geopolitical competition, how do you advise countries and companies to navigate those two things?
Well, of course, the international supply chain are driven by this market rationale. The countries such as China, which has the long-term strategies to provide the more preferable options for the global south, is actually currently dominating the market in the minerals and the natural resources. The point is that we need to accelerate the idea of that the international competition does not necessarily the solution of for the question of the decarbonization and energy transitions. So probably what we need to do is that first we need to set up strategies to enhance our geopolitical and the geoeconomic relationship with certain countries in the global south, particularly the countries in Southeast Asia, such as Indonesia. And also we need to encourage the countries like Australia or Canada to work together with the other global south countries to provide the resources that they have. And I think it is also very important that because this market is driven by the market rationale and economic rationale, we need to offer better solutions and better offers to the countries of global south. together with the, the supply of the international aid, international development of the infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So I think this is not easy because China has already established a very strong relationship with these countries and offer certain, beneficial agreement with those countries, but I think there are still some rooms, and because of the increasing demand for the natural resources, especially the critical minerals, I think it's not too late to start working not only by individual countries like United States, Japan, and Europe, but I think we need to make a coalition of the countries of the demand side, such as in the case of the oil, the petroleum, when the OPEC has, when the oil shock took place in 1970s, the demand side created the International Energy Agency to collectively bargaining against the oil-producing countries. So I think, this kind of a coalition of the demand side is also a better solution for reaching to more openness of this market.
Thank you very much. Are you fine with the response from Suzuki-san? Okay. So Hosoya-san, do you have any comments or questions about this topic, or something different, or question to Sullivan-san? Or
Thank you very much, Mikami-san. If I may, I'd like to ask Professor O'Sullivan on the future American global leadership role. Many in Japan here are wondering whether the United States can effectively play or continue to play global leadership role in many fields. So 2 months before, at the United Nations Security General Assembly, the United States was the only country which was against the continuation of the SDG. It was quite shocking that the United States was against some of the important goals that we have shared. So perhaps we are seeing something radically new in American politics. And here in Japan, many are wondering whether this is just a deviation, temporary deviation, or whether this is a new start of a kind of a radical politics in the United States. And many basically feel that we are seeing some structural change in American society, American politics, or global politics as a whole. So as an advisor who have been very close to previous presidents, I don't know whether you are advising the current president or not, but anyway, I am very curious about your feeling about the future American global leadership role. And I also like to add that passing away of both Ambassador Richard Armitage and Professor John Nye from Japan was quite indicative to the end of the previous age of the US-Japan alliance.
Thank you. There are many questions in there, and I would say it's not only people in Japan who are wondering about whether these politics in the United States are going to endure or whether they're relatively short-term. So I would say it's something that many Americans are asking themselves as well, and there doesn't seem to be a clear answer right now. What I will do is give you my opinion on this, and I think that it would be wrong to conclude that this is just an aberration or just the work of one singular person in the White House, that this is just someone who has a particular orientation that is relevant for these 4 years, and then once that person leaves the White House, that we will be back to business as usual. I think we now realize that that is not the case. There's something deeper at work, and I think we get some more exposure to the answer when we think about what propelled Donald Trump to the White House twice. And the answer to that has to do with big social and economic trends in American society that have unfolded over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. And those social and economic forces have revealed a real strain in American politics, which has led to a desire to focus more domestically and to refashion America's international relationships more closely associated for what it means for domestic audiences. I think that will endure. However, I think the particular style of a President Trump is unlikely to endure going forward. And so here the challenge is separating out the style from the actual content. And I would say the style goes beyond just a kind of rough and tumble politics, but it is an erraticism and an unpredictability, which I do not think is part of the strain that we're seeing in American politics. So I guess the best that we can surmise at this point is that it is important for countries to look at America and to think that America's engagement in the world is going to be different in the sense that there is going to be a stronger strain of America looking out for American interest and potentially less of a willingness to make sacrifices solely in the interest of supporting an international order that many Americans question. That said, I do feel that it's not a time to assume that America is no longer going to be able to play a global role, particularly in the medium and long term, where I think we'll see some different politics going forward. So I know that's not an entirely satisfying answer because there are so many variables at play, but let me just end on talking about the US-Japan relationship. And it's true that Richard Armitage, who I worked with in the State Department, and Joe Nye, who I was very close to for the last 2 decades, were extraordinary people when it came to understanding Japan and building the US-Japanese relationship. I would say that there are many in our foreign policy establishment who appreciate the real importance of this bilateral relationship and the extraordinary strength that America gains from being allied with Japan. And so I'm hopeful that this relationship will endure in its very special nature, but it will go through bumps as it has in the past. There are many places where I think the Japanese called into question the endurance of the U.S. relationship. And fortunately, we got over those bounces, and I'm hopeful this will be another case in point.
Are you satisfied? Okay. So, yeah.
Can I ask you, O'Sullivan-san, your commentary about the coalition of middle power and the Japan's role to play as a bridge. So, could you elaborate more about how Japan can play as a bridge between the global south and countries like United States and China? What are the you said Japan can be a policy innovator. So what sort of a policy innovation that you expect to bridge the relationship between the global north and south, or the U.S., China, and the rest of the world? What kind of resources, what kind of potential that Japan has to make the world go around and make sure that this sort of a as you said, it's very multipolar, fragmented society, the world to be somewhat reintegrated.
Sure. Let me give you some thoughts, but then I'd also like to propose that our colleague seek to answer this question as well from a Japanese perspective, because I'll give an example that has actually to do with Ukraine and the global south, but I think it is a place where Japan had some insights before the rest of the so-called West did. And that, again, comes to Ukraine and how there was it was a bit of a surprise to many parts of the Western world, to Europe, to the United States, to discover that the Global South was actually not sharing its point of view when it came to Ukraine. And in fact, when they looked at how the war in Ukraine was unfolding, there was a sense that this was not a war that the Global South was interested in seeing fought, that this was a Western war, and that it was a war that was coming at the expense of the Global South because of the increases in energy and the food crisis that followed as a result of the war in Ukraine. And I think there it is helpful to have countries, and Japan, I think, was in a better position to identify that the lens through which Europe and the United States were seeing this war was not the lens through which the rest of the world was seeing the war. So I think that's a little bit more of like a translational role that Japan can play. And in part because Japan, I think, has these relationships related to its development focus, its ability to help the developing world. It can enter into some of these political discussions without the same baggage that perhaps the United States and others might find themselves burdened with. So I think that's just one way. But when I talked about policy innovation, I was thinking about things like the CPTPP, that is like an incredibly important policy innovation that Japan was very consequential in forming, and to think that we need more such vehicles for the future in order to look for ways to stabilize both economically and geopolitically in this age. But I would be also interested in your views on this question as well.
May I? Thank you very much for your kind invitation to talk. I feel that Japan has maintained a very important national identity for a bridging role in a divided world. Like Japan has been or has maintained a very important idea of ASEAN centrality by focusing on the importance of ASEAN. And after the end of the Cold War, Japan initiated the start TICAD, of course, African importance of African economic development by studying it. So I think that Japan has been playing a very important such bridging role in a divided world. Besides, Japan has a bit more stronger domestic political foundation than the other G7 countries. And Japanese domestic politics is, fortunately, less divided than the other G7 countries. So with that stronger political foundation, a much less divided society domestically, I think that Japan now can play, as you implied, some important role by presenting some important policy initiatives. But that policy initiatives, I think, is based upon the Japanese role in the world of such a bridging role in a divided world. Even during the Cold War years, Japan actually played such a role. So when Japan joined the United Nations in 1956, Foreign Minister Shigemitsu mentioned that Japan should play a bridging role between the East and the West. And in addition to that, Japan has been playing a bridging role between the South and the North. So in this way, I think at this particularly divided world, Japan's policy initiative becomes furthermore important.
Thank you very much for your interesting discussion and comments. As this is the business forum and the audience comes from the business sector, and we talk about the role of Japan. So, but the Japan, maybe the Japanese government, Japanese corporations, civil society, academia, depending on the role or where they stand, the role may be different or play a different role. So I would like to ask each one of you how the Japanese corporations, the business sector, can contribute to bridging, for example, to serve as the bridge between East and West, or the South and North, or take leadership in the middle powers. So who would like to start? Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I think there's a lot of things that the Japanese business can do in order to enhance the Japanese capabilities of bridging the global South and U.S.-China relationship. I think, you know, Japan has a reputation of being a country of peace, and I think Hiroshima represents the sort of an international reputation of Japan as one of the, you know, it's a victim of a bomb, but at the same time, we are learning a lot from it. So I think the lessons that we learn in the first place is that the protectionism and the block economy is bad, so that the businesses has to go free to connect different markets and the different supply chain networks. Japan has been very much of the, you know, the operators in Southeast Asia, as well as in Middle East. But I think one of the problems for many years in Japan was that there was a separation of the businesses and the politics. There was no coherence of the strategy. But I think in recent days, you know, people are talking about economic security and geoeconomics, which involves more dialogue between the business and the government to set this, to target the, or to set the similar objective of both businesses and the governments for stabilizing the long-term interest and the long-term supply chain, to make sure that, you know, both government and the businesses will benefit from to have the sort of a common or synchronized strategy. And I think this is reflecting on the way in which that Japan invests in the infrastructure projects in Southeast Asia or Africa or Middle East. And I think these are also seeking an opportunities to explore the business opportunities in those global South countries. But at the same time, Japanese industry has a lot of stakes in U.S. market as well as in China, and China is the largest trading partner, and the United States is the second largest. So again, for the business reasons, you know, the Japanese government currently negotiating with the U.S. administration for the tariff negotiation, and these are also, you know, setting the sort of a similar, you know, strategies together with the businesses, and to make sure that, you know, they are pursuing the same objectives. And one of the results is that the U.S. acceptance of the Japanese investment in the steel industry. So those are the sort of, you know, there are some results that, you know, this government business dialogue producing the sort of a, you know, geopolitical and geoeconomic objective aligned with the, you know, aligning the government and the business interest, and to make sure that to open up the possibility for the Japanese businesses to enter into a market, and then the business relationship will create more, will facilitate the opportunities for the governments to establish a better deal with the other countries.
Thank you. Mr. Suzuki, would you like to go?
Sure. Let me answer this in a slightly different way, a different lens, although I appreciate that thoughtful response. When I think about the role of corporations going forward in the world that we've been discussing, I'd highlight two things. First is just the importance of being a constituency for continued efforts to integrate the global economy. That was a driving force of the last 30 years in particular. And now we've seen not a stop to globalization, but we've seen a more regionalization of the global economy. And that I think businesses have a very important role to be a constituency, constantly pushing for the continued integration of the global economy as being in the interest of most of the citizens of the world. The second piece I would say is very important and consequential relates to technology. And I know that while we were preparing for this panel that others heard a panel on technology. But I imagine that one of the key elements of any conversation on technology right now is that we are moving or already are well into a phase in history that is going to be shaped and in many cases driven by technology in a perhaps unforeseen way, that AI could well be the most consequential technology for humanity since the development of the nuclear bomb. And if that in fact is the case, which I believe is true, then corporations are actually going to be the source of the most transformative human technology rather than governments or other entities. And this is unusual for our history, that in the past it's been a consortium of the private sector, the public sector, and universities that have produced large technological advances. And in this world in which businesses and corporations are the driver of technological change, there comes an added responsibility, because governments, either because they're incapable of it or they're unwilling to play the role, may be too late in trying to make some determinative judgments about how technology should and could be used. So I think there's an added burden on corporations as they think about technological change.
Well, thank you. I have a feeling that Japanese private companies perhaps much more internationalist and also innovative than the majority of Japanese government departments. In this way, for many decades, I think that the Japanese, those business companies have been enlightening Japanese people on the necessity of having such an internationalist and an innovative mind. But at the same time, it is also important to understand that we are living in the world where the world is much less safer and also much less transnational than before. So in this way, I think that previously it was much easier for many Japanese business companies to extend its global supply chain. But nowadays, we really need to fully understand military security affairs, which limits those mobilities, those transnational activities. So the security issues, military affairs are much nearer to us, even though among Japanese people, military security issues, geopolitical issues seems to be far away. But Japan is located in exactly the most dangerous world, most dangerous geopolitical place where nuclear powers are surrounding us. I mean, North Korea, China, and Russia. So in this way, I think that the Japanese people need to, and the private companies need to fully understand that we need to prepare for any kind of contingency which would occur surrounding us.
Thank you very much, Hosoya-san and all the panelists. So we have more or less 10 minutes left to close the session. So I will start to summarize kind of a really rich and diverse discussion in Japanese, and I would like to ask comments to each one of the panelists, the concluding remarks. So I'll switch to Japanese. まず、
First of all, Suzuki-san, thank you very much for your participation. In the beginning, you have talked about the semiconductor and energy, and also important minerals, and also the issues regarding this security. The minerals and the semiconductor, they actually the minerals, the source of semiconductors. In the global south, in those countries, they are coming from those countries. Considering that, and also that you consider the flow of supply chain. So those supply countries. I think the stability in those countries, those supply countries, will be very important. And when it comes to ESG, so P is important in that regard. I think you have said that. And HOSOYA-san, the theme of yours is that you have. Well, you have talked about the Europe situation changes due to the Russian invasion in Ukraine war. And so you have migrated into global south. So, but it might have been difficult for you to explain very clearly about these two. But you have just combined these two and concluded that these two have interlinked closely. And that we were able to understand. The third one, Professor O'Sullivan. So far, the prosperity and peaceful 80 years, 8 decades have come to change. The more competitive and also the cornerstone of the safety, which is the United States, is changing. And also the economy is facing a bit of dichotomy. So the superpowers are not protecting the international orders anymore. So that kind of a structure is breaking up. And in those circumstances, those countries referred to as middle powers, they have the potentialities and also the roles that we can lead those middle powers have been mentioned by Dr. O'Sullivan. And after that, we have had the very fruitful and colorful discussions, and in which Japanese business role have been also discussed. And well, probably after listening to you, and also probably among the audience here, they might think that a peaceful society could contribute to the prosperity of an economy, the society, in order to make it possible to achieve, what could be really the desirable order, international order. It has to be the order by law, not order by power. I think that is kind of framework that we have to put in place.
So when you look at Japan, both government and businesses, or business sector, need to collaborate with the middle power or developing countries so that Japan can be the bridge between developing countries and superpowers. And this is how Japan and Japanese business can play an important role. And Professor O'Sullivan also talked about the technology and how it's advancing. And business sector is ahead of the government in the field of generative AI and other fields. And the businesses need to be responsible to make contributions in the development of technologies as well. So I would like to have closing remarks by each one of you. So let's start from Professor O'Sullivan.
Thank you. I will, in terms of closing remarks, I will be brief to say Right now, when I look at the world, particularly in light of how the United States is interacting with other countries, I think perhaps we are looking at an age of bilateralism, where everything is being done country to country. Based on this conversation and some of the trends I tried to highlight and you so nicely summarized, I think there's the potential for this period to be more than just a period of bilateralism, but could be a period of mini multilateralism. So smaller coalitions of countries coming together to advance particular objectives at a particular moment in time. And that may be a way that we can still address transnational problems at a time of real fracturing of a global order. I don't want to end on a pessimistic note, but I would say while I'm supportive and hopeful that we will still have an effort to be multilateral in the sense of a global efforts to deal with global problems, I'm less optimistic that in a competitive, fragmented world that will be the best vehicle for solving global problems. I think we should continue to press ahead with a desire to deal with things in a multilateral way, but recognize that there is something between being multilateral in the sense of a global effort and being bilateral, and it might fall in this category of small, mini-lateral efforts.
Thank you very much. お願いします。最後に一言。
はいはい。
So one last closing remark, and allow me to speak in Japanese. I would also like to thank you for having a very good discussion. And I'm very honored and happy that I'm able to be part of this forum. So one thing that came to my mind is that this session is titled as Rise of Global South and Transformation of the World Order. I mean, the fact that Global South is really rising, meaning that traditional superpowers influence countries like China or the US, is maybe declining. So, as you called it minilateral earlier, but the middle power like Japan should be able to capture the trend of Global South, but at the same time, especially when you look at the new administration in the US, there is a significant change in the world order. But I think Japan need to be able to capture the trend at the right timing. And what's important here is when we work in minilateral way, Japan need to play a pivotal role to maintain the rule-based global order. And today, it seems like there are some countries like China, Russia, or the US trying to seek for a power-based world order, but in some ways their powers are declining as well. And then I don't think it's possible to maintain the power-based world order perpetually. So somewhere in the future, they have to come back to the rule-based world order, but we need to prepare the place that they can come back to in the future. Mr. HOSOYA, please. Well, thank you. And Professor Suzuki, I echo with what Professor Suzuki said. But if you think about the rise of the Global South, I think the rise of Global South itself is changing the power balance in the world today. 100 years ago, there was a significant change, and that was the time Japan and the United States rose up, and we experienced 2 world wars. Now, the rise of Global South is the one that we are seeing, and we see instability in global order. And then we see increased potential of using nuclear weapons. And this year marks the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. And 80 years ago, for the first time in history, atomic bomb was used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But after 80 years, we never encountered the incident that nuclear weapon was used in the war or conflict. So the fact that we had 80 years without having the nuclear weapons, and we need to extend the time of these 80 years even further, and that's the mission we have. Professor Hosoya, thank you so much. So with this, we would like to close this session on the rise of the Global South and transformation of the world order. Panelists, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you very much, Professor Sullivan, Professor Suzuki, and Professor Hosoya, and Ms. Mikami.